One of the greatest challenges those of us suffering the reactivity and the triggers of post-traumatic stress when entering new relationships is how to stay ahead of the curve. i.e., when someone being late for more than 10 minutes and leaving you in the dark about that brings up so much reactivity, so much uncertainty that by the time they arrive, you're a wreck and it's not worth the evening. Or if someone breaking a promise is so upsetting that it means the end of the relationship. Or if someone's uncertainty, like, yeah, I'll think about it, I'm not really sure if I'm into you or not, I'll get back to you in the next week or so, is such an absence of certainty and container that it's going to ruin the next few weeks to such an extent that it's not worth the bet. You know, what do you do when the typical modern social interaction has a high predisposition to activating and reactivating traumas and wounds that are so intense that they basically bankrupt the relationship before it even begins. This is one of the biggest challenges and questions because, unfortunately, in the current paradigm, we don't have the intelligence to invite one another to share the things in a first conversation that would help work around this issue. And as a result, we have this kind of game that works a little bit like this. Hey, let's get together sometime, see you around, complete vagueness and short, unclear about what it is, etc. And there's no invitation to say, well, there's a whole bunch of things you should know if you want to interact with me. And do you want to know them? Oh, I'm kind of busy right now. And so they do their thing and they trigger us. And then we do something that then seems strange to them. Like, sorry, I need to disengage. Well, why? We didn't even know each other. Well, because of this and this. Well, that's weird. Well, then that becomes a new trigger. Now, so there's a way that this can just spiral off into a trigger of a trigger of a trigger, and it's just miserable. And so how do you break free of this issue? And I'm curious what your pattern is at present. Is it avoid relationships? Is it wait till other people initiate? Is it to just be terrified and uncomfortable and nervous the whole time as most relationships start or try to start and then crash? What's your strategy? And I want to move forward in that conversation with one possible response that with caring and conscious individuals can be very effective. So what is it? I call it a user's manual. So what is a user's manual? It could be a variety of things because I'll tell you a little bit of the terrain, because while it makes obvious sense to me that if something as simple as a toaster is apparently so confusing to enough people that it comes with a 21-page user's manual, which basically just says how to plug it in, how to press the button, how to get the toast out if how to put it out if it catches on fire, blah, blah, blah. Don't drop it into the tub when it's, so just the basic stuff. But this is important apparently to communicate about something as basic as a toaster. A toaster doesn't have feelings though. It doesn't have triggers. It doesn't have PTSD. It doesn't have thoughts. It doesn't have philosophy. So if a toaster needs a user's manual, it kind of makes sense that a human being needs a bigger user's manual. Now, what a user's manual can do at its best, just like an appliance, is that before you electrocute yourself with your toaster, it says, don't drop it in the water. Read this first. And so what a user's manual can do at its best is it can say, hey, there's a few things you may want to know about me that will significantly affect our odds of success of what could be a great relationship or could be a relationship that needs to end and does end before it even begins. But let's make that process a little bit conscious towards that end. Here's what you need to know about me. And I welcome hearing back similar stuff about you. So this, unfortunately, as intelligent and as courteous as it is, leads to an immediate problem, which is that we're a culture of critics. And so this is immediately as something that's unusual and vulnerable and requires more work on the part of the recipient. Like, why do I have to, why do I have to read your user's manual? I don't have to read anyone else's. I just bumble along and have my statistical failure and success rate and all that it is. Why do I need to do this just for you? So when you ask someone to do more work, when you ask someone to do something different, when you ask someone to do something that's a little bit uncomfortable, and we're in a culture that is so critical and pathologizes so much, immediately what a lot of people do around users' manuals is say, they try and figure out what's wrong with the request. So one thing they may do, wow, you think you're so special, you need a user's manual? Like, who do you think you are? So that's one reaction you can get. Two, this is too much work. I don't want to deal with this. Great. Now we've weeded you out, because if you don't want to learn about what triggers me and all that, then you're not a good person to be this close to me. Three, well, what's this about? And I don't, whatever it is. So there's a mixture of response, but the biggest thing that I've had as a misinterpretation is that, on the one hand, if you don't tell someone all this stuff up front and they like you, and then the relationship is at an end before it even began because they did 2 or 3 things that triggered you, before they knew that they triggered you, they're going to blame you often, like, well, why didn't you tell me first? Not why didn't I ask you first? Why didn't I make an hour and invite some flow back? But in the 10 minutes or so that I gave you without any invitation and the communication that I was in a hurry, you were still supposed to tell me, an hour's worth of data first. So the message is, I would have listened if you had told me, which is not usually the case. But then on the other hand, if you tell them, it's like, well, who are you that you have all this information? So there's this double bind. Now there's a way out of that in the United States, which is that it is considered vulnerable to pathologize something. So, or to pathologize oneself. There's a risk in that as soon as you label something, they're not going to look at you, they're going to look at their stereotype of the label. So it's a very tricky thing to get through this maze of all the various obstacles that the typical American has to having a truly vulnerable, intimate connection with anyone. And we're kind of navigating through this. But here's a couple of thoughts and ways. So one is stop, big stop sign. I have PTSD. And there's a couple of things that most people don't know that you would greatly benefit by knowing. And in case you do want to know, I've taken the time to break it down for you. Now this breaks through the wow, you think you're so special, you arrogant person, that you have your own user's manual and all, and that's weird. And this, because it's self-explanatory. One, you're saying, there's some important things that you need to know. Two, PTSD triggers oh, that's serious, that's important. Three, you're not putting yourself up in the cultural norm, you're putting yourself down. You're saying, I have PTSD, so the response is not you arrogant so-and-so, which it would be if you just say, there's some important things that I'd like you to know before we begin. Why? Why you? And so saying, I have PTSD is a way around that confusion and judgment and creates interest. So I happen to think that everyone should have a user's manual because relationships are so important. And a user's manual, if it can help you interact with a toaster, it can certainly help you interact with a complex mental, emotional, physical, logistical, financial human being that, so it can help. So what should be in a user's manual? Here's a couple of things. One, what is PTSD, or what is, this diagnosis or whatever? And two, what triggers me and why? This is vulnerable and perhaps the most important part. Three, what does an ideal relationship look like? What are some of the ways that work really great at navigating around the triggers and bringing out the best in me so that I can give my best to you? And then beyond that, you've got lots of optional stuff that can create an amazing document that I think is pretty neat. So I'll just go over some of the stuff that I have in my user's manual. Astrological data, Enneagram data, diet and allergy data, schedule data, how to interact, what's my routines, so that you have a very clear sense, oh, you got an 80-90% chance of doing something spontaneous with me after 8 p.m. You got a 50% chance of doing it, beforehand, because this is my routine. Here's when I get up, here's when I go to sleep, here's, this is my typical routine, so that people have a sense of the flow point. And they know how late they can call me and stuff like that without having to feel into that. What do some peak experiences look like? What are some peak experiences I'd love to share with someone? What are some of my goals? What is the paradigm and values that I'm most interested in relationship? What are the deal breakers for a friend? What are the deal breakers for a lover? A little bit of my life history, spiritual beliefs and why. What else do I have in my routine? I guess philosophy, things that I judge, what causes me, pain, that's part of it, but also what makes me feel completely and totally loved. 1 to 10 scale, you give this to me like this, it's an 8. You do this for me, it's a 10. You do this for me, it's a 2. You do this for me, it's a -6. If you try and love me this way, it actually shows up as a negative for this reason. So I'm educating and I'm taking someone rapidly into my world if they want to, so that they've got the code to have the desired effect by doing specific actions. So I have created 3 user's manual. One was a very short text user's manual. Then I went to a 400-page long text user's manual that kind of went under it's like I just included every single thing that in most of my relationships no one had any idea about most of it. Or, the best, when my very best friend in my entire whole life, who I'd spent 80% of my time with over the last 4 years. So it's a really big intimacy, and we have all kinds of intimate conversations, and she's read all my books and all that. When she read this 400-page user's manual, she said she understood me 30% more than she did before, which to me was the point, was if your very best friend who knows you more than anyone has known you in your entire life doesn't know a whole third of you, because they don't know what they don't know, they don't ask, and because it doesn't fit easily into the time brackets. Because what you do with the user's manual is it's a great courtesy. You let them read on their terms, you let them see all the chapters they're interested in, and you tell them, there's this data, like, oh, I don't even know what an Enneagram is, but here's Dane's Enneagram. Okay, that kind of makes sense. That helps me see something a little bit more clearly. So, what are the love languages? That's a useful thing. How do you like to sleep? Do you like to sleep enmeshed and cuddling? Do you like to sleep cuddling until you drift off and then separate and not touching? How do you like to wake up? When you arrive home, what's your kind of ritual of arrival before you engage? For example, I like to check my email, put my car keys in a certain cup, refill my water bottle and put it in the truck, put all the mail in the bill box, check the phone messages, return client calls, check any important client emails, return those, and then I actually arrive to my partner. So that's a process that takes between 15 minutes and an hour every evening. And if my partner just walks up and says, hey, as I walk in the door, I'm flustered because I'm not at peace until I've gotten all those things done and my slate is cleared and I can forget about the day. Nor do I want to reject her. So it's an education process. When I arrive home, I'm not really home in terms of us. I will announce when I've arrived home after I've done this, and this. So you just ignore me. I'll arrive home physically, and then when I'm arriving home mentally and emotionally to you, I'll say, I'm home. How's your day? And that's when it begins. Do you understand? Will that work for you? Is that a good arrival process that can work for you? Because it's a very big negative to lose that routine for me, and I'm not going to be as present for you, and you deserve my presence. So can we do that, or do you need to be in another house so that I can arrive home and do all this stuff without educating you, and then invite you over after I'm ready for you, and then you don't have to learn all my secret codes and all that. But so this is the kind of question that makes the difference, success or failure. So that's what I want to suggest as a relationship project to dramatically improve the chance of success. And what I want to say is that relationships are most fragile at takeoffs and landings, at beginnings and endings. So if you're just beginning with someone and you call them at the worst possible time and they don't want to hear from you and you take it personally, and you take them out to eat and you order food that has allergies and they don't really want to make the whole evening about that, so they eat it and get a bit sick, or you feel foolish and awkward and then you're doubting yourself rather than enjoying the evening, and then you make a judgment on a really sensitive topic and it's like, I do not want to see this person again. But if you knew all that and were informed, the whole rest of the relationship could go great. You'd go to another restaurant, you'd avoid that judgment, and you wouldn't call it the worst time. You'd call it the time where they're delighted to hear from you and you get the message, they want me. And then those three things in the beginning, and now the relationship takes off rather than crash and burn in the first 72 hours. So that's the purpose, and good luck. And know that it's a courageous, vulnerable act, and it is a gift. It is a gift for anyone who wants to succeed, who wants to be intimate, who cares enough about you to know. And that becomes one of its secondary values. As you give and honor someone with the gift and the opportunity to know you and to succeed with you, their reaction, in my eyes, frames a great deal of their intelligence. I find that the most experienced, kind, sensitive, and conscientious relationship partners that are willing to put in the work to succeed, they want and are grateful and appreciative and patient with this user's manual. And the people that don't, you get to see from their face, from their judgments, from their questions, exactly what you're going to be dealing with them anytime you bring up something sensitive and vulnerable that needs delicate cooperation. And I would say that if you're dealing with relational PTSD, complex PTSD around bonding and dissociation and parent and relationship issues, you don't want to be in relationship with someone who's not profoundly honoring of the terrain and respectful enough of themselves as well as you to bring out the best in you and the seeing of who you are and the sense of who you can be when who you are is truly respected.